So good afternoon, everyone. My name is Monique Nicolai, and I'm delighted to be here. I want to thank ASL and Mark Sheffield for hosting this emerging business seminar, and also to Jill Meringen and Amanda Welch, who also were very supportive in putting this together. I'm the director of MN Global Consulting, a firm that has assisted numerous companies with their global expansion, which is why ASL and Mark Sheffield have asked me to be here and share my experiences with you today. While speaking with some of you during the networking session, I wanted to sort of point out who the startup companies were. May I get a show of hands of who's actually in startup and looking to go overseas? Okay, good. Thank you. And have you already identified the countries you want to export to? Okay, great, good. Thank you for that participation. Here's the agenda over the next 10 minutes. I'm going to quickly cover the following topics. Emerging global markets, focusing on the key opportunities and key opportunities for exporters, as well as what problems you could be solving for the needs overseas. What is the global export flow? And what are some of the local resources that you could be utilizing here to help you make inroads overseas? There's an e-commerce model and the resources that are available on the internet for you to utilize. And then afterward, like Mark said, we'll take questions. So, who am I? As I said, my name is Monique Nicolai, and we're an international business development firm. I saw you laughing back there. We leverage our cultivated relationships to support U.S. companies in their efforts to export globally. Our focus is on the low-tech and consumer goods, and we do this through helping companies identify and source manufacturers, select distributors, and agents within their desired foreign locations. So the inroads are important when you're trying to export globally. On the right side, you'll notice DeVreaux Exports Limited. They're actually the global agent that handles the importing and exporting of the containered goods from port to port, and also the transportation through. So they actually move the products and services that you want to export. To give an example of what we do, I had a US company that wanted me to source custom-made, or to source furniture, or to find a manufacturer that made custom-made furniture and negotiate on their behalf. So I acted as their representative in country and handled all of those negotiations. And I chose Turkey because of their skill set of handcrafted furniture. The U.S. client that I had wanted to sell into the European Union, so, boutique hotels that were established in the European Union. Once the goods were manufactured, once the goods were completed, my company handled the logistics, the distribution, and the transportation through to the port of Genoa, Italy, and into the wholesaler in Germany. So that's an example of what with what DeVreaux Exports can offer. In helping emerging businesses succeed in the global marketplace, I want to give you some practical tips that will help entrepreneurs, founders, and startups and ramp-up companies or young companies that want to hitch their startup to global resources. Let me first discuss the opportunities for Bay Area startups and offer some insights regarding the current market interests or trends for solving the problems for providing solutions overseas. Asia. The Chinese consumers are interested in U.S. Brands and luxury brands, and U.S. brands are considered to be of quality and represent higher safety standards. Europe. Overall, European cultures are environmentally conscientious and continually seeking solutions and ways to conserve. So California has pioneered many of these technologies. Africa, sustainable energy and water purification are key for these, for Africa as well as developing nations. And health services, medical devices, hence the recent Ebola crisis. These are opportunities for startups to make expedited inroads into these markets with solutions. The Middle East, 30% of the adult population suffers from diabetes. So we have medical technologies and services here to control and monitor those health needs. And Saudi Arabia is the largest largest requirement for healthcare and products and medical equipment. So in the Middle East, they continue to be a thriving sector with vast potential, offering startups expedited inroads again. And South America, the growing middle class in Brazil love American brands, retail brands. Also, Rod Hirsch mentioned to me at one point that there's California brewers that are looking to make inroads in the Brazilian market. So the World Cup has also invigorated interest in exports to Brazil. So this flow here, the value of an export consultant is to expedite inroads into overseas markets. The core of any business is based on relationships. Our company understands global sensitivity, cultural diversity, business practices, and knowledge of efficient timelines. So every country offers a different set of business challenges and characteristics. A reverse example of this is of this export flow. I had a UAE-based client that was wanted me to source textiles out of Bangladesh. I chose to utilize the free trade zones in the country where my company handled the relationships between the manufacturers, the transporters, and imported into the U.S. So that's a reverse of the export flow. So to recap, an export consultant builds overseas inroads, finds trusted partners and suppliers, and sets up distribution channels, and generally navigates the host country's hidden business rules, allowing you to do what you do best, which is develop your product. So in this business-to-business scenario, which is more complex, startups can leverage the resources and as well as consultants' existing overseas relationships. This is an expedited way to have pre-established alliances of networks and business entities, service providers, to enter global markets or to set up local distribution for their low-tech products, consumers, and services. So, some of the best practices are knowing the destination country's requirements, culture, and business practices. Know your product and how to localize your product to fit into the global market. Researching and utilizing your resources are paramount to your success, and building your startup empire through relationships. Every exporter is faced with challenges, so understanding timelines, cultural differences, and quality control are key. This is my go-to list, and many of you are in the audience. Rod Hirsch, over here, thank you, is the U.S. Commercial Service offers a gold key matching service. In the past, I've worked with Rod, who's been an abundant resource for exporters, and is very well connected globally. The local Silicon Valley, Joanne Lier, is also very much in touch with startups and companies that could utilize her resource in making inroads to overseas markets. Stan Lewandowski from K&L Gates helps to establish startups in the Valley, back there. And his law firms practice in 48 fully integrated offices in the US, Asia, Australia, Europe, the Middle East, and South America. So global services equals, global service providers equals expedited inroads. That's key. For international trade regulations and export compliance, Deep Semgupta, which is right here, he's with the District Export Council, and what I consider the guru of export and import. Very knowledgeable and an excellent resource. So also the Greater San Jose Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, Carlos Figueroa is here as well, and his international business organization is an expert relationship builder for the Bay Area and abroad. This gentleman's right there. And so, of course, we have the Trade Port organization for great exporting statistics and information that you'll require to do research. The Monterey Bay International Trade Association is also very active with agriculture, ag tech as well. And then you have the U.S. Department of Commerce, the Small Business Administration, which is also a great resource, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and the Trade and Development Agency, USTDA. So there's also the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC, not to be confused with OPEC. And they, if 51% of your products and your goods are manufactured here in the United States, they could be a funding source to you with the proper requirements and criteria. So there is these are all available online as well. So Bay organizations that, this slide depicts a list of the organizations which are very active in the Silicon Valley area. And these organizations provide businesses with an outlet to network and gain understanding of overseas markets and cultures. For instance, the Business Association of Italy America, BAIA, is actively promoting trade between Italy and Silicon Valley companies. Another organization that I've recently worked with is the U.S. Polish Trade Council, which is aggressively marketing Polish technologies in Silicon Valley, and those can be reciprocated. Those relationships can be reciprocated overseas. These are valuable resources and networks, but I must caution you, it's time consuming to attend all of their events. They're very busy in this valley. So this is an e-commerce model. How does it help? How does this e-commerce model help small businesses? Well, business is booming and it's here to stay. The e-commerce has proven to be the key and most resourceful tool to startups. According to U.S. Department of Commerce, about 4% of import companies are the big guys, the Targets and the Walmarts, for example. The other 96% of importers or exporters are people like you and I, entrepreneurs, startups, small business owners, and the same applies for the global markets. This diagram shows the e-commerce model, which is best utilized a direct-to-consumer sales, business to business, for the internet, and is extremely effective way for you to level the playing field and make inroads with smaller budgets. So building your online social media is the norm and expected. The caveat is you must distinguish yourself between the other million of entities doing the same. This e-commerce resources, these are the preferred sites for e-commerce sales, marketing, and online localized talent. Localizing your market to drive demand and finding the right partners in each territory, how you can hire low-tech product craftspersons overseas from Mexico to Estonia, and high-tech as well. So you can find these lists on the internet for potential manufacturers, online trade, magazines, through import-export organizations, and also a way to source in-country or local manufacturers, though I caution they must be vetted first. And it's time-consuming, and that brings on a whole new set of challenges. So remember to optimize your e-commerce site for the country you're targeting, the translated pages or SEO keywords in the other languages, the search engine optimization, your target market for your target market. Mobile phone compatibility and capability is also key. Oh yeah, one thing about ELANS and ODAS, these two offer localized help. So let's say Germany is the country you want to work with. You can hire freelancers that are in Germany, and they'll understand the marketing of that local country. So that is key to promoting your website in that country. So you wouldn't source it here, you would source it in Germany, and they understand that expertise for the local market. So to be a successful startup in today's market, you need to think and act globally. So, thank you.
I am. Okay. So, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rohit Tarkunde. I represent Radius. We've been in business for about 20 years. It was a husband-wife team that started out in the UK. Two very smart people who met a Bay Area CFO, believe it or not, from Fremont, who'd been sent by his CEO to the UK to set up offices in the UK, France, and Germany. And he was running around like a chicken with its head cut off, because if you think about it, in every country where you plan to be, you need to have some resource that's going to do your local bookkeeping. You need some HR help in, getting the employment contracts that comply with local laws, making sure you've got staff manuals if needed, etc. You need someone to run payroll. You need a local law firm to do your in-country compliance filings, plus the actual setup. So they realized that there was a niche in the market in providing a one-stop solution to US companies that are expanding globally. So we are a very strange combination of accountants, lawyers, HR specialists. We have offices in, 2 offices in India where we have consolidated our accounting, and we do the accounting for our clients across multiple geographies. We have HR support specialists, actually, through a centralized information database in the UK. So currently we've got almost 800 clients that we support in almost 70 countries. We're doing about over 3,000 country operations every month. It could be compliance filings, it could be running payroll, it could be doing your local country and the US GAAP simultaneously, the accounting part. I want to thank Abbott, Stringham, and Lynch for allowing me to speak here today. Pamela, one of the principals of the company, she's actually in a networking group with me, so that's how I actually got to know the company, so thank you. And I want to thank everybody here. My presentation is going to be brief. Based on what Monique just gave you, the overview of what's needed to go overseas, Radius will offer you services that kind of sit a little behind once you've identified which markets you're going to go into. So I'm going to give you my presentation on really what Radius actually brings to the table. We help businesses move into new markets. The commonality between our clients across our client databases, they have a small handful of employees across multiple geographies. So you can't possibly justify hiring admin either in the HR or the finance functions to be positioned in one particular country because you really don't have enough traction coming out of that country. However, because of the business that you're doing, the business activities you're conducting on the ground, you do require to have some sort of a registration in country. So our job would be for startups who are looking to expand initially to identify where to go, what to set up, what's the most appropriate entity or registration to set up, and then support it. Our services include doing your international accounting, regardless of how many entities you're in, how many countries you're supported in. We basically give you a consolidated one-stop solution. All the finance, banking, tax, HR, and legal, basically everything I said. To augment all these services, we have something called Overseas Connect, which is an online platform which allows you complete control. It gives you viewer access for all the work that we do for you in each of the countries of engagement. So it's literally like a drop-down box where, like a dashboard where you choose the country that you want to look at. And the drop-down box will actually give you detailed accounting records, and they're manageable. So you can actually prepare reports, customized reports that you might want to present to your board. You can see payroll journals. You can see expense reporting with the actual receipts embedded in there. All the compliance-related filings that are in country with the actual document also embedded in there. Makes your life easier. If you are in multiple countries, this might be an investment worth going after. So that's pretty much it. I'm going to go over just a couple of things because really what we do is it gets really technical. So I'm going to give you a very brief overview of what to think about right about the time when you're looking to start expanding globally, trying to figure out which countries perhaps to go into if you're not sure. Human resource questions, 10 best practices, etc. So here you go. VP of Sales walks into the director of, or the VP of HR's office, always appreciated. 2 signed offer letters. I got these 2 great people that we're going to now, they're going to start working for us starting Monday. Wait a second, what are they? The company doesn't have an office in France, Brazil, Zimbabwe. I have a few other countries that are on that list where you want to think real hard before you go in. Everyone here has heard of horror stories of trying to fire somebody in France. Believe it or not, France is straightforward. Just wrap your head around the fact that whether the person's worked with you for 20 minutes or 20 years, there's a severance package that is attached to that person. If you don't have the correct due diligence behind the hiring of an employee, and this kind of applies to most of Western Europe, where all the employment laws are based on collective bargaining. They're very heavily favored towards the employee. You're going to be in very, very serious trouble, because if the local employment tribunal deems the person to be a salesperson, and you haven't really set up any registration locally, a salesperson's collective bargaining rules are a lot nastier than anything else you know. So that's where we come in. Just make sure we got our ducks in a row before we even issue an employment contract. So do we need an entity? If so, what options do you have? Are these employees contractors or employees? A lot of times you just say, I'll just wire you money to your account. You become my contractor. I don't need to set up or invest in a certain country at all. For the most part, bad idea. What types of contracts are required? Is it a really, is the person really a contractor, or is he actually an employee that's just basically jumping through hoops every time you call him or her to do your work? Local requirements and managing expats. That's actually a little too, we don't really need to go into that today. Permanent establishment. This is the principal driving force behind why, behind the rationale of actually setting up in a certain country. PE basically is business activity that generates revenue in a country. You could have somebody that's sourcing business for you. It's your first steps looking at new waters. You might not need an entity. A simple payroll registration, what we call a rep office, might just suffice because the person's not doing core company business. He's not generating sales. He's not negotiating contracts. If he's just looking out to see what sort of a market that particular country holds, you might not need to invest too much into that country, at least for the short term. If it doesn't work out, then you're good to, you don't have to sit there and worry about, I have a subsidiary in that country. My goodness, how do I shut it down? It can be expensive and it can take a long time. PE is also, for the most part, in the gray area. You have to local authorities have different interpretations. Perhaps two different regulators in the same country might have complete different interpretations on what your business activity is on the ground in that country, and then determine whether you have a PE risk in that country or not. Are you operating out of a fixed place of business? Are the employees receiving commissions? The minute you say commissions, clearly that means commissions are based on sales. If you're doing sales in my country, where's my cut? That's the standard question everyone's going to ask. Are sales made to customers in country? There are loopholes and ways around figuring out what's the easiest way, what's the best way. Do you have a PE in a country, and how do we tie the whole thing up? The determination of a PE gives local authorities the power to assess income or VAT, some sort of a tax. You basically inherit a taxable presence on the ground. That's really the bottom line once you've been determined to have PE in a certain country. Contractor versus employee. Typically, a contractor in a country is supposed to have other clients other than you. Rule of thumb is 5. Generally, it's like one for each working day of the week. A contractor is supposed to also is supposed to show investment in his or her own business. In other words, there should be some sort of cost of sales. You got to have your own tools of trade. You got to have your own business card, not the U.S. company's business card, because then clearly you become an employee. So there are certain qualifications, like a test of a contractor versus an employee. 2 years ago, a client came to me. We'd given them a proposal for setting up in Brazil, which is which has very onerous employment laws. They decided to hire 2 brothers as contractors, when in essence they were really just doing work for this one particular company. 2 years go by. The brothers were doing wonderful business for these guys, to the point where now they said, we'll hire our own people. Let's get rid of the brothers. The brothers said, wait a minute, what did we do wrong? This is loss of our vocation here. They took them to the local employment tribunal. 30 minutes, the ruling was in their favor. They were asked to be compensated. And the brothers were making money. Most of it was commissions, about $100,000, which in Brazil can take you a long way. So they were both given 1.5 years' salary, plus the fact that you're now looking at the business coming from Brazil and the tax assessed on that. I'm giving you worst case scenario. This is not something that happens every single time, but I've known clients to suffer very, very heavily. There are some startups who are pre-revenue. They say, what are you going to sue us for? We'll just go with contractors. We have net operating losses here in the US. Yes, but for the most part, again, worst case scenario, the local government might say, this is the amount of revenue coming from this country, so we might tax you on that. If you have net operating losses here, they would strip all the R&D costs in the US, after which a lot of companies might actually just end up showing profit, and then they tax you on that. Bottom line, they want their cut. So that's basically it. Contractor versus the employee. Offer letters, employment contracts. One of the things that Radius does is once you start identifying employees in certain countries, regardless of what entity or registration we're going to set up for you, it's important to have an employment contract that's compliant with local country laws. Why do we do this? Again, because employment law is written in, it's not very favorable towards the employers. If you write a California-based offer letter to your employees in Europe, there is a dispute, the employee takes you to the local courts, and they rule in that employee's favor. The first thing your local counsel in country will look at is the offer letter or the employment contract. If it's deemed to be invalid, then you as the employer, you lose all the rights that you could possibly have had as the employer in that country. So it's very important to make sure that we follow local compliance when it comes to preparing any kind of a contract, especially related to employment law. I've got 10 best practices for expansion. When you're a startup, and you might be bootstrapped, you might be angel investors sitting, looking at, auditing every single penny you're going to spend. So you might want to be careful with how you're going to expand globally. Is it right for your business? Because the question always comes, if I'm selling tangible product into that country, it's perfectly legal to use a third-party distributor in country. The question is, what sort of a PE do you have at that time in that country? If you have sizable revenue coming from that country, despite having third-party contracts, you might have a PE risk. So when is the right time to actually enter a particular country? What are the goals that you're looking at when you're expanding internationally? The key is to start small. Don't overextend yourself. You can always ramp up if you have a business model that's scalable. That's really where your success lies when you're going global. Start small goals and then ramp up big if needed. Create a detailed plan for setup. A lot of times I get clients that ask me, well, based on our future cash flows, we might want to consider moving our IP overseas. Where do we go? Do we go to Cayman? Do we go to Ireland? Things to consider, and you need to have someone giving you objective truths on your own business. Sometimes I get asked, I'm going to finish using up all my net operating losses in the US. I don't want to pay the 40% corporation tax here in the US. Should I start recognizing my revenue outside of the US? All the big companies, Cisco and Oracle and all these guys, they all have huge cash reserves that are now built up outside of the US. So that's a consideration. We can help. Determine early how you're going to structure your company based on all the topics I just gave you. Resist the urge to standardize. Every country has unique pitfalls, banana skins like we call them, that you could slip on. It's preferential to basically educate yourself on knowing what you're getting into before and not after you get into a country. Know that almost everything will be different. From the HR standpoint, certain countries in Europe you give them a salary, but there's a 13th month payments that you have to give. Some countries have 14-month payment that it's like a bonus that's given out around Christmas. Understand what the hidden cost of employment is. You might have Social Security contributions that you as the employer have to pay, which are deducted every time payroll is run in a certain country. Don't underestimate the effect of culture. I got a client that we set up in Chile 2 years ago. And it was a joint, US and the UK, both their entities were going to be joint parents of Chile. And this was a recommendation we made because the director of sales from their UK office was actually going to go and start Chile. So if you have two co-parents of the Chile entity, it's far easier and cheaper to do an intercompany transfer when you're setting up the company in Chile by saying, we're doing an intercompany transfer. and this person's going to go there specifically for the purpose of setting up the entity. We're going to be doing sales, blah, blah, blah. His wife was Polish, and she needed to sort of inculcate the culture. So we actually found somebody in the UK that could help with understanding what local norms and customs were. Prepare realistic budgets, contingency plans if things don't work out. Do we have worst case scenarios in mind? Spending can start restrained, mushroom in the future. It's always preferable to just sort of show restraint in the beginning. Recognize that you will need initial ongoing support. Financing, HR needs to be involved heavily to make sure that the risks are always going to be there, but we can mitigate them as and when needed. Be patient. How many times have you heard of companies, oh, they grew too fast? Well, perhaps we didn't have enough time to make sure that we had the right resources allocated to every single business function that we were planning to do overseas. Get help. Even if you have the best product or service team in your industry, your time is likely best utilized focused on what's important, and that's your company. Clearly, I'm giving a pitch about Radius and what services we offer. It kind of ties down to the last part here. The administrative functions, whether it's compliance, whether it's local bookkeeping, whether it's understanding HR and culture in a certain country, that can take up a lot of your time and can only add perhaps 5 to 10% of productivity for that particular operation. What Radius says is, well, let us handle that for you so that you can have your employees in country, and the headquarters for that matter, to focus on their revenue generation and actually try and achieve your international goals. This is what our promise is. The business software, the Overseas Connect, basically sits at the bottom of all the services that you could possibly need, or what we call pain points in countries across the world. The value add that we offer is we give a one point of contact for all your consulting needs and another point of contact for all your accounting work. And that's it. These 2 points of contact don't change regardless of all subsequent expansion that a client would have overseas. The biggest client we have in terms of headcount would be, I don't know if you guys know the company Hawker Beechcraft, the private jet maker. So granted, they make the planes here in Wichita, Kansas, which is where most of their people are. But we support them in 26 countries with a headcount of just under 1,000, with 920 or 30. So they don't have enough in any one country, and they're happily giving everything over to us to manage. Tesla is another big client. SuccessFactors is another big client. They are mainly US-centric, but they do need operations overseas, but not enough to justify having their own finance team or HR team overseas. So that's where we can actually help. And that's me. Thank you very much.